The chaos started at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning. Two paramedics stood on my front porch, looking thoroughly confused. Behind them, a fire marshal paced back and forth with his arms crossed, clearly irritated. A police officer scribbled notes while another spoke into his radio. And there, standing in the middle of my driveway like she owned the place, was Patricia Harmon, the self-appointed president of the Meadowdale Heights HOA. She wore her signature string of pearls, her power blazer, and those ridiculous 4-inch heels she insisted on wearing to every neighborhood meeting. Her arm shot out dramatically toward my house as she declared, at the top of her lungs, that I was emotionally unfit for property ownership and demanded they seize my ranch immediately. The most ridiculous part of this whole circus was that I was inside my kitchen, completely unaware of the commotion, peacefully spreading mustard on whole wheat bread for my morning sandwich. My name is David Sullivan, and at 53 years old, I thought I had earned the right to some peace and quiet. After 30 years as an electrician, crawling through attics and dealing with faulty wiring, I retired early and bought myself a little slice of heaven in Meadowdale Heights. 5 acres of land, a modest ranch-style home with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, and most importantly, enough distance between me and my neighbors that I could water my tomatoes at 6 o'clock in the morning without having to make small talk. That was the dream. What I hadn't counted on was Patricia Harmon, the HOA president who ran our little suburban neighborhood like her own personal kingdom. She called herself the Community Standards Director, though I suspected she made that title up herself. When she wasn't terrorizing homeowners about their mailbox colors or grass height, she taught yoga classes at the community center and sold essential oils to anyone foolish enough to answer their door. The trouble between Patricia and me started over something so trivial it still makes me laugh. 3 months after I moved in, she showed up at my door with a glittery invitation to her monthly vision board potluck. Apparently, all new residents were expected to attend this gathering where neighbors would share their hopes and dreams while eating casseroles and discussing the proper feng shui arrangement of garden gnomes. I politely declined, explaining I had plans that evening, which was technically true, since my plan was to sit on my back porch and enjoy the sunset in blissful solitude. Patricia's smile froze on her face, and she informed me with a syrupy sweet voice that community participation wasn't optional in Meadowdale Heights. I thanked her for the invitation and gently closed the door. That was my first mistake. The violations started rolling in the following week. First, I received a formal notice about my mailbox creating, quote, negative energy flow on the street. Then came a citation for improper driveway aura, whatever that meant. My personal favorite was the warning about my oak tree harboring what Patricia called hostile shade patterns. Each notice came on official HOA letterhead with Patricia's loopy signature at the bottom, demanding immediate correction of these alleged infractions. I filed them all in a folder labeled nonsense and went about my life. That was my second mistake. Patricia escalated her campaign against me with the determination of a general planning a siege. She started leaving anonymous letters in my mailbox, though her handwriting was unmistakable, claiming my property was disrupting the neighborhood's spiritual harmony. She told my next-door neighbor I was building an underground bunker, which was completely false. All I'd done was install a small root cellar for storing vegetables. At the monthly HOA meeting, which I only heard about through the grapevine, since I was mysteriously removed from the mailing list, Patricia stood before the board and declared my home a threat to the community's collective well-being. She actually used the phrase, psychic pollution, to describe my property. When a board member asked for evidence, she produced a binder full of photos showing my house from various angles, with red circles drawn around completely normal features like my rain gutters and porch light. The situation reached new levels of absurdity when Patricia started recruiting allies for her crusade. She convinced Eleanor Ramsey, from 2 streets over, that my refusal to plant decorative cabbage was a sign of antisocial behavior. She told the Johnsons that my workshop in the garage was actually a front for some kind of doomsday preparation society. The rumors grew more outlandish with each telling, and soon half the neighborhood believed I was everything from a cryptocurrency criminal to a witch doctor. The sensible half just rolled their eyes and went about their business, but Patricia's devoted followers hung on her every word. That Tuesday morning, when the emergency vehicles arrived, I had just finished my sandwich and was pouring myself a second cup of coffee when I heard the commotion outside. I opened my front door to find what looked like half the county's emergency services in my driveway. Patricia stood in the center of it all, waving her arms and shouting about emotional instability and property seizure. She had a clipboard in one hand and her phone in the other, apparently giving a play-by-play to someone on speaker. When she saw me, she pointed dramatically and announced that the subject had emerged from his lair. One of the paramedics looked at me, then at Patricia, then back at me, with an expression that clearly said he was wondering what he'd gotten himself into. The lead police officer, a patient man named Officer Daniels, approached me and asked if I was having any kind of medical emergency. I assured him I was perfectly fine and invited everyone in for coffee if they needed to verify my mental state. Patricia practically shrieked that I was clearly in denial about my condition and demanded they take immediate action. When Officer Daniels asked what condition she was referring to, she produced a stack of printed pages from various medical websites. She had diagnosed me with everything from severe antisocial personality disorder to something called residential dysfunction syndrome, which I was pretty sure she'd made up entirely. The paramedics exchanged glances that spoke volumes about what they thought of Patricia's medical expertise. As the situation unfolded, it became clear Patricia had called 911, claiming I was having a mental health crisis and posed a danger to myself and the neighborhood. Her master plan, as she explained with increasing agitation, was for the authorities to declare me mentally unfit, remove me from my property, and allow the HOA to take control of my ranch for the good of the community. She kept using phrases like emergency intervention and protective custody while waving her fake medical documents. The fire marshal, who had been silent until this point, finally asked why he'd been called to an alleged mental health situation. Patricia claimed my property was also a fire hazard due to what she called combustible energy patterns. Even she seemed to realize how ridiculous that sounded as soon as the words left her mouth. I decided it was time to share my side of the story. I calmly retrieved the folder I had been keeping of all Patricia's bizarre citations and handed it to Officer Daniels. As he flipped through notices about hostile shade patterns and negative mailbox energy, his eyebrows climbed higher and higher. I also produced my phone and played a voicemail Patricia had left the previous week, where she threatened to use her connections in the cosmic community to curse my septic system if I didn't comply with her demands. The other officer had to turn away to hide his laughter. Patricia's face went from red to purple as she realized her campaign against me was being exposed. The final nail in Patricia's coffin came when I showed Officer Daniels the security footage from my front door camera. For weeks, Patricia had been coming onto my property at odd hours, sometimes with what appeared to be sage bundles, other times with strange measuring devices. In one particularly damning clip, she could be heard telling someone on the phone that she was one bad Mercury retrograde away from seizing my property through cosmic adverse possession. Officer Daniels watched the footage with an expression that grew more serious with each passing minute. When he finished, he turned to Patricia and informed her that filing false emergency reports was a serious crime. Patricia's confident facade crumbled like a stale cookie. She stammered about community welfare and proper energy alignment, but the officers were having none of it. They cited her for false reporting, misuse of emergency services, trespassing, and harassment. The fire marshal added his own citation for wasting department resources. As they escorted Patricia to her car, she kept insisting this was all a misunderstanding, and that she was only trying to protect the neighborhood from my toxic aura. One of the paramedics muttered something about the only toxic thing being Patricia's behavior, which earned him a grateful nod from me. The aftermath was swift and satisfying. Within days, word had spread throughout Meadowdale Heights about Patricia's meltdown. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, where they voted unanimously to remove her from her position. The county launched an investigation into the HOA's finances and discovered Patricia had been using association funds for her personal spiritual retreats and essential oil inventory. She was ordered to pay back over $15,000 in misappropriated funds and was banned from serving on any HOA board in the state for 10 years. But the best part? She was sentenced to 200 hours of community service and 6 months of court-mandated anger management classes. When the judge read the sentence, Patricia's jaw dropped so far, I thought it might hit the floor.